In this lecture, we are going to begin switching tabs. Let's look at the modal on the front end. There are two forms inside the modal. You may not be able to view the other modal. I've hidden it with CSS. The modal should display one form at a time. The form that gets displayed will be based on the current active tabs. At the top of the modal, we have two tab links. The active tab will have a bright text color. Let's inspect the element for the tab. The links are created with anchor elements. We can change the color of a tab by adding a class called ActiveTab. As you can see, this class has been added to the login link. By default, the login form should be displayed. There's another useful piece of information on the link. The href attribute contains the ID of the form. If we look below the unordered list element, there's a div tag called modal body. Inside this element, there are two forms. Looking closely, the IDs match the values from the href attribute. Changing tabs will require adding and removing the active tab class from the links. Afterward, we can hide or display a form by toggling the display property. The href attribute will help us decide which form to display. Let's get started. In your editor, open the frontend.js file. We are going to add our code at the bottom of the function. The goal is to listen for clicks on the tab links. Therefore, we should select the links. Create a variable called tabs. The value for this function will be the document.querySelectorAll function. The selector will be the following: tabs A. The unordered list element has a class called tabs. Inside this element, we are selecting the anchor elements, which are the links for the tabs. After making this selection, we can begin looping through the elements to apply click events. Let's call the forEach function on the tabs variable. Pass in an arrow function that accepts the tab element. Previously, we used a generic name for the selection. This was because the open modal class could be applied to any element. This time, we know what kind of elements will be selected from our query. Whenever possible, I prefer specific names. Inside our arrow function, let's call the addEventListener function on the tab variable. The name of the event will be called click. Lastly, pass in a function to handle the event. We are dealing with links. Clicking links can cause the page to refresh. To avoid this behavior, let's accept the event object. After doing so, we can call the event.preventDefault function to stop the browser from updating the page. Great! We can start to toggle the active tab class from the links. Here's where things are going to get tricky. We must remove the active tab class from the other links before adding it to the current link. Otherwise, multiple links may have this class. The question becomes, how do we know which tabs have this class? The answer is, we don't. The solution to our problem is to remove the class from all links. We are going to need to create another loop for the tabs. We can't reuse this loop because the loop runs once. We need to loop through the tabs after a link has been clicked. Inside our loop, let's call the tabs.forEach function. Pass in a function to handle each iteration. We are going to refer to each item in the array as current tab. The class can be removed by calling the currentTab.classList.remove function. Pass in the active tab class. Once again, we are looping through the tabs to remove the active tab class. At this point, all links should not be active. We can proceed to add this class to the tab that should be active. Below the loop, let's log a property called event.currentTarget. Next, let's refresh the experimental page with the console panel from the developer tools. We can open the modal and start clicking on the links. As we do so, both links should not be active. Inside the console, the event.currentTarget property has been logged. JavaScript is aware that multiple elements can have the same event. Without JavaScript's help, it can be difficult to determine which link was clicked. Luckily, the event object has a property called currentTarget. This property is an object for the element that triggered the event. We don't need to guess which element emitted the click event. The currentTarget property will contain the same methods and properties for interacting with the element. Thus, we can add or remove classes through this object. Let's give it a try. Back in the editor, we're going to replace the event.currentTarget property with the following function: event.currentTarget.classList.addActiveTab. After adding the class, let's try testing the links again. Head back to the browser. If we open the modal, everything appears fine. Clicking on the tabs should cause the script to update the link with the correct color. So far, so good. We're halfway there. The last step is to display the correct form. Luckily, we have most of the information we will need to accomplish this step. Let's head back to the editor. First things first, we must get the href attribute from the link clicked. Grabbing this information will be easy. We already know how to grab the element that triggered the event. At the bottom of the loop, create a variable called ActiveTab. The value for this variable will be the event.currentTarget property. We're not interested in grabbing the entire element. The attribute can be retrieved by training a function called getAttribute. This function will grab any attribute value from an element. It accepts the attribute name as a string. Let's grab the href attribute. After grabbing the href attribute, we will be able to update the correct form. Before doing so, we're going to need to select both forms. Above the loop, let's create variables that store references to the form elements. First, let's grab the login form. Create a variable called signInForm. The value for this variable will be the following value: document.querySelectorSignInTab. I've given both forms IDs. You can check out the template for their respective IDs. For the login form, the ID is signInTab. Let's create another variable called signUpForm. The ID for the registration form is signUpTab. Let's select it with the document.querySelector function. Great! We've got references to the forms. Back in the loop, let's add a conditional statement. We are going to check if the ActiveTab variable is strictly equal to the signInTab. If it is, we can assume that a visitor wants to view the sign-in form. Previously, we toggled an element's appearance for our class. We could use the same solution again. However, I want to show you a different approach by manipulating an element's styles. One solution isn't better than the other. I just want to show you your options. Inside the conditional statement, set the signInForm.style.display property to block. The style property is available on all elements. This property is an object of styles applied to the element. However, it doesn't display styles from classes. The style must be applied via the style attribute for it to appear within this object. We have the option of adding styles to this object. The name of the style must be a valid CSS property. In this case, we are adding the display property. The value for this property must be a valid CSS value. JavaScript will handle adding the style to the element. Before moving on, we must hide the registration form. We're going to assume the registration form is appearing. We can hide the form by setting the registerForm.style.display property to none. We're almost finished. The last step is to hide the login form if the Register Link tab was clicked. Let's add an else block. The code will be the same, but with the values reversed. we can copy the code from the if block to the else block. Lastly, reverse the values. We're finished. Head on over to the browser to refresh the page. This time, we can fully test the tabs. Upon opening the modal, let's try switching tabs. As we do so, the forms will change. The correct form should appear in the modal as we switch between them. You can even click on the same tab twice to test if the form stays around. Perfect! We've successfully created tabs with plain JavaScript. In the final set of lectures, we can start submitting the form data to WordPress. When you're ready, I'll see you in the next lecture.